there guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Anna Sophia if you're new here, and I post home decor and DIY content every single Sunday. This Sunday is no exception, but instead of doing my typical like 3 or 4 DIYs, I thought it would be so much more fun to kind of round out my favorite thrifted home decor DIYs that I've done since the course of my YouTube journey. Obviously I did so many before I started YouTube, but these are just 21 of my favorites that I've done, and I want you guys to tell me down in the comments below which one is your favorite. And also don't forget to hit that subscribe button because that lets me know that you're liking the kind of content that I'm posting, as well as ring that bell so then that way you get notified every time I post a new video. And with that being said, let's jump into our first project. For the first DIY project, we are going to be making a faux potted olive tree. I ended up getting lucky and I found 2 of these enormous pots for only $14.99 a piece at my local thrift store. Sometimes you just get lucky with these sort of pots like this, but it is rare to find pots of this size for this price. So the first thing I need to do with these pots is paint them in a flat matte black paint just to give them a good solid base. A, these were dirty, and B, I didn't like the shininess of them. I wanted to be more flat because we're going to give it a more aged and sort of like weathered appearance. And in order to give it that weathered look, I just took some mud just as it was starting to dry and just rubbed it all over the entire pot. The reason you want to apply the mud while the paint is just starting to dry is because you want some of that mud to pull into the paint that you just applied to your pot. So that way it does really give it that weathered look, and then you can just wipe off whatever you don't want to stay. And that's all we're really gonna do with the pot for right now. Now, some of you might remember when I picked up this mini olive tree at the thrift store for only $3.99 when I did a thrift haul a few months back. And I didn't like the pot that it came in, and I said it then. So what I decided to do was actually remove those stems so we can make our faux tree. I also ended up buying this 10-pack from Amazon, and I'll make sure I link that in the description below. However, I had the same problem with both of these stems in that they were just too small. Stems were just not gonna work. They were too clustered. Because I really wanted like an 82 to 86 inch tree, I needed branches that were really substantial. So I just removed the leaves off of the old stems and applied them to the branches that I picked up in my backyard, and it made it look so much better. So I know it's more tedious, but it really gave it a better look in the end. So that's really what we're doing with the branches. Now for the base, I'm not gonna go super in depth because you guys have actually seen me do this before. If you watched my IKEA hacks video, I'll link it in the cards here. But basically what you wanna do is you wanna find a very tall branch and peel the bark, get some cement, stick the branch in the cement, let it dry overnight, and then remove the plastic that you molded the cement around. And that is really it. Again, for a more detailed tutorial, if you've never worked with cement or branches before, I'll make sure I link that IKEA video in the cards here. So now we have the main pieces to the basic puzzle of our faux potted olive tree. So we have the trunk, we have the pot that's done, and we did our branches. So now it's just time to go in and apply just small sprigs to the places that the branch was naturally gonna grow leaves or flowers anyway. In order to fill out this tree, I needed to use a 1/16 drill bit into specific places that would look good in my particular tree in order to fill those holes with the branches that we created. Another thing you're definitely gonna wanna need for this project is some wire cutters to make everything just seem really seamless, and you can measure everything really well. Don't ruin your scissors trying to cut floral wire. And once it was the right size and shape, it was just time now to apply some hot glue and then stick that sprig directly into that hole that we just made. This DIY was totally inspired by Valerie. She ended up doing a ficus tree, which turned out amazing, but I love olive trees, so that's why I went this route. So I'll link her video in the description box below. And this is kind of how she did the majority of hers, using kind of the sprigs that were already there on her ficus leaves and attaching them to a tree. We ended up having, like I said before, to make several different branches because my tree was so sparse. But it's really the same concept. You're just gonna have to use a bigger drill bit to get the branches to fit in those spots. So I think here we used maybe 1/8 of an inch, and then we kind of almost had to make our own little pegs to fit in. So it's really like a puzzle. You're just making pieces fit together so it looks like it naturally happened this way. In order to give it that really seamless look, we did have to do one little thing that Valerie didn't have to do, and that is to paint the trunk of our tree, because after we had removed that bark, it wasn't the same color as the branches, and that was really bothering me. So I ended up just mixing brown, gray, and black paint, and then adding just a little bit of water, almost making my own stain to kind of give it a more seamless finish. Now that they were all going to be the same color, as you can see here, I'm just matching it to the small branch. What is so crazy is I was literally going to order this Pottery Barn olive tree for $399, and I'm ranking it about $62 so far for this one. The only thing left we have to do is add more branches and then fill the pot. A little trick if you are trying to fill a fairly large pot and you don't want to use all of the expensive materials, just fill it with some like either old trash bags, like the paper recyclable trash bags, or craft paper or construction paper, and just kind of surround your pot with that so that way it occupies more of the space, and then fill it with your expensive stuff. So whether that be your rocks or your moss or whatever you choose. I decided to go with some Spanish moss just because I feel like that fits the style of my home better, but do whatever suits your home best. And this is how our faux potted olive tree turned out. For the next project, we are going to be making a candle wall sconce. I've seen this floating around Pinterest and I thought it was such a cool idea, but I don't have anything that's really like that at my house already, so I'm gonna try to make it using this tray that I got from the thrift store a while back, and this elbow piping that I honestly have no idea where it's from, but I found it and I'm gonna try to use it. Because the metal wouldn't stick to the metal on its own, I just cut a piece of cork and placed it in the piping and hot glued it together, so then that way it would adhere to the tray. And then I just placed the candlestick in the piping and it's done. And I think it looks great. The next DIY is still one of my favorites, and it is that linked wood object. One of the first sections I always gravitate towards whenever I go to the thrift store is the wooden decor or wooden bowl section. I ended up finding this huge salad bowl collection. It had 4 smaller bowls and 1 big bowl. I was totally inspired by something I saw on McGee & Co.'s website. It was a linked wood object, and this is the only thing I could come up with, and I think it turned out amazing. What's so nice about this project is actually the saw that I ended up using. Even though I have a table saw and I have a circular saw and I have a miter saw, I ended up using a hand saw just because as much as I wanted this DIY to work, I didn't want to lose my fingers doing it. So this ended up being the best way. It was time consuming, but the result in the end is just so beautiful. After I was able to remove all of the bottom sections of 3 of the bowls, I decided to use my electric sander using 100 grit sandpaper just to get off those rough spots and to make it a little bit more smooth. And then I also did the exterior of the bowls as well. Obviously, this is totally optional, but I wanted to stain the wood back to a similar color to what it was originally, but I wanted to stain on a smooth surface, not something that was super rough and raggedy. And in order for the bowls to actually link together, I had to cut a slit in 2 of the 3 of the bowls so that way they would stick to one another. So after I got the positioning kind of down, I just took a picture so I could know where I needed to add the wood glue after the stain had set in. And of course, we're using the only stain I own, which is Special Walnut by Varathane. It's pretty much the only stain we have. I did have to ask my husband to do this for me because I am pregnant and stain is not recommended recommended for pregnant women. So he was very sweet and he took care of this part for me. And obviously we chose to use stain, but really all you need for this project is a handsaw and some wooden bowls, and you can get a look that's very similar to what I did see on McGee & Co.'s website in my opinion, and I absolutely love how these turned out. Another one of my favorites was that pedestal table made from a Lazy Susan and an extremely large candlestick holder. Something that I always seem to find at the thrift store are Lazy Susans, and they're usually for a pretty affordable price, which is always nice, but there's so many things you can do with a Lazy Susan for organization, for decor, for like hosting sort of things, but I had a completely different intention. I picked this one up from the thrift store for $9.99, but it was fairly large, so I mean, that's why I think it was a little bit more expensive, but I'm actually going to take the Lazy Susan part of this and attach it to something else that I have in mind, but that's not the thrift flip I'm gonna show you today. I've been really inspired by seeing all of these pedestal tables on all of these really high-end decor websites, and I wanted to make my own. So this top piece of this Lazy Susan, that is what we're gonna make the top of our pedestal table. And I had this old candlestick holder. I've had it for so long. I picked it up from the thrift store in Scottsdale and it was, I think, $8.99. And I decided this was going to be the base of our pedestal table. And now that we got the basics down of what our little table is gonna be, we know the base, we know the top, now it's just time to get into like the nitty gritty of it and finishes and things like that. So I'm gonna show you exactly what I did. So the first thing, I'm so sorry, I think someone actually did this as a DIY themselves, and it might've worked in their house, but it definitely doesn't work in mine. So I had to sand off all of that work that they did. And as I really started to get in there and sand all that off, I noticed those slits were actually quite deep and that I was going to need to do something about that because I didn't like the way that that looked once I sanded everything down. And right here, I'm just using some powder wood filler. You just mix it with water and you just mix about as much as you think that you're going to need. And because those slits were deep, but they were small, I didn't need that much. So after I filled those in, I just took a putty knife and wiped off the excess as much as I could. After that wood filler had all dried, it was just time now to take my electric sander again with 100 grit sandpaper and get off all of those rough spots while leaving the wood filler to set in those slits. The reason I didn't attach the base and the top of this table to each other first and then do all this, I think it's just easier to work with stuff once they're separate and then put them together as you want them. So the trickiest part in this DIY for me was just making sure that the measurements were right. So I measured that base part of where the Lazy Susan used to be, as well as the top of the old candlestick holder. And then I subtracted one from the other and made sure that I had the same amount all the way through, making slight adjustments as I needed to. This is the part that I would take the most time on, just to make sure that your table is actually going to work and not be wobbly or uneven. I just traced a circle so I knew where I was going to apply my adhesive, but before I did, I just wanted to check just one more time to make sure it was in the middle, and it was, thank goodness. And the adhesive that I decided on was E6000. I used an entire tube of E6000. E6000, if you're not familiar, is an industrial strength glue. This isn't something I would really recommend using hot glue or even wood glue because only one of your pieces is glue and the other one is metal. And it was slightly caved in at the top of that candlestick holder, so I wanted to make sure that everything was nicely stuck together. E6000 can take up to 72 hours to cure, and with as much as I put on there, I wanted to make sure that I gave it at least that amount of time. Plus, I did put a 20-pound weight on there just to make sure that it would hold. After our adhesive had finally cured, it was just time now to finish that top piece, and I could have painted it and I could have stained it, but I don't know, I liked how like natural it looked and I didn't want to ruin it with paint or stain in this case. So for us, we just decided to do a polyacrylic finish to the top just to protect it, like when I'm putting my coffee on there or if I'm setting like a vase with water, just to keep it nice and sealed. And for just around $20, I'm so happy with this pedestal table. Another one that you guys really liked was the faux leather tray. One section I never skip at the thrift store is the basket section. And I found this one for only $3.99. And I believe whoever owned this basket first used it to store their onions. So it just really needed like a good cleaning. So the first step is just to separate those pieces and unscrew the back. If you don't have a drill, you can definitely just use a screwdriver like you first saw me do. And then I'm just saving all those screws so I can reattach that piece to it after I'm done cleaning it. Obviously, this goes without being said. Every thrift store item, you want to make sure you're cleaning it very well, but I normally don't have to clean stuff this well, like throw it in my tub with soap and all this. So usually I just like wipe it down with some soapy water. And everything that was on there was just like really stuck on there, like these little like onion flakes, and it was honestly just really creeping me out. So I ended up just letting it soak in the tub for an hour, and then I went in with my brush and just really wiped everything down extremely well with some disinfectant soap. And after everything had dried really well and it was very clean, it was just now time to change up that little insert that goes in the basket. And I have this faux leather vinyl fabric that I decided that I was going to staple and give it a new life. Leather trays can oftentimes be really, really expensive, especially at the high-end stores. So I wanted to keep this DIY still really affordable. So I'll make sure I link the vinyl that I used in my description box below. It's from Amazon. And all I'm doing is I'm just gonna staple it to the back of this piece. Now, if you've ever reupholstered furniture, then you'll have no problem doing a DIY like this. I haven't done it a ton, but basically what I found was the best was just to get one side kind of well down, and then I did all four corners. And what I mean by that is, let's say I'm working on the bottom right corner, then I'm gonna go diagonally across and do the top left corner, because I wanna make sure I'm stretching that fabric in the place that's going to be the hardest to staple down if I don't do that side next. And one tip, whenever you're reupholstering anything, kind of, if you can, keep flipping it back and forth just to make sure like what you think is gonna look good is actually looking good from what you're gonna be seeing. And after I stapled everything down really well in the back, I just trimmed off that excess fabric just to make sure it laid really nice and flat. And then we saved those screws in the beginning, so it was just time to screw those back in. And this is how our little tray turned out. We are going to be making a beautiful fruit tray. I have a kitchen table that is longer than it is wide, and I really wanted something that was kind of rectangular in a way. And I saw this gold raised tray on Target, and it actually wasn't that expensive already, but I felt like I could definitely use some items that I had thrifted and recreate this item. After cleaning off the tray and just letting it dry and cleaning out the candles, I only needed one candle, and for the set it was only $3.99 for the candle holders, and then the tray was only $1.99. So basically what I'm going to do is just attach the two pieces together to make my raised tray. I don't know about you guys, but I really struggle with creating a strong bond of adhesive just using metal, which is why I'm bringing in a wine cork. So even though I'm going to be using E6000 and hot glue, I wanted something in addition to create a bond from the tray to the actual candlestick. The reason that I'm using both is hot glue has a true benefit that it works quickly, but it's not gonna hold up as much as you want it to over time. And E6000 is a great industrial strength glue, and it takes up to 72 hours to cure, which is the toughest part for me, but it really does work extremely well. I thought it would be easier to flip it upside down instead of the other way around, because then that way I would have a better idea of where the center actually was. So I just found the center by placing it in the middle of those two bumpers and used that as my guide. And now it's just time for some spray paint. I chose to use this one by Krylon in metallic gold because that's kind of the inspo that I saw on Target. So I wanted to replicate that as much as possible. And once that was all dry, the easiest part, it's just time to put my fruit in there. I chose to use peaches and clementines, and this is how it turned out. Another one that you guys seem to really like, which surprised me because I almost didn't share it, was the watercolor clock. I'm gonna show you guys kind of quirky DIY, and that is to make a watercolor clock. I love these on Society 6's website. They're so pretty, and they're actually pretty affordable, but I ended up picking up this clock, and yes, it does work. I checked it with the battery first for only $5.99, and I thought this would be a perfect kind of way to show you a little bit more affordable way to do this. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm just removing the screws from the back and then setting the frame and the glass off to the side. Now you can choose to paint the frame if you don't like the frame that you found, but I liked the color mine was, so I left it alone. Now I'm just wrapping the hands in some painter's tape as well as all around the perimeter of the clock. I definitely could have chosen to just dismantle the whole clock, but it really didn't feel necessary. It almost felt like overkill, so this way is just so much easier. Once everything is perfectly taped down, it's just time now to go in with my Apple Barrel white acrylic matte paint that I use so often. I'll make sure I link it in the description box below. And I feel like this is gonna be kind of controversial because obviously in order to give it a watercolor base, I have to start with a blank slate. And I mean, if you know the top of the clock, you should be able to tell what time it is. I don't really need the numbers for that. So obviously if you want to leave them, you totally can, but I don't feel like they're necessary, so I painted over them. And once everything had all dried, I ended up having to do 2 coats. I really liked the colors of this picture that I picked up from the thrift store, so that's what I'm trying to replicate too. I'm actually just gonna use this palette that I picked up at the Dollar Tree for watercolor, as well as some of these brushes. Because I like a much more muted color palette, obviously this palette here is very pigmented, very saturated, so I had to add quite a bit of water, and also it's very helpful to have a piece of paper off to the side to kind of get your colors correct before you apply it to your clock or your canvas or whatever you're doing the watercolor on. And this is only my second time doing anything with watercolor in my entire life. So I think that if you stick to an abstract, especially a landscape abstract, then you're in good shape even if you don't have any experience, because watercolor is so forgiving. And once you're happy with the end result, it's just time to now attach all those pieces back together, the glass, the frame, and then the screws in from the back. And obviously you're gonna need to pop the battery in so it's a functioning clock. And I hope this just inspires you guys to get out there, try something different. Like if it doesn't look right, just keep messing with it. That's what I did with this DIY. That's why it's not a full tutorial on watercolor, because I'm not an expert. So just keep messing with it until you're happy. And this is how it turned out. I'm gonna show you guys how I upcycled this thrift store box. You can find so many incredible boxes for such an affordable price at the thrift store. And I ended up picking up this one for only $3.99, and there was nothing actually even wrong with it. It just wasn't really my taste, and definitely just needed some TLC. So I'm gonna show you exactly what I did. This DIY is probably the easiest of the bunch because we're not like moving mountains. I didn't like the hardware, so that's an easy fix. You just remove the hardware, use a screwdriver, and then I didn't like the color it was, so I sanded it, and then I had a little bit of this Fresh Earth chalk paint left over by Behr, and I just was like, this is perfect. I'll finish this box and I'll get rid of the can. So it was a win-win for everybody. And obviously this McGee & Co piece is gorgeous, and I feel like boxes just look pretty on shelves, you know what I mean? So it's just like such an easy thing, an affordable thing that you can do, and it really can make a major impact in your design. And this last step, totally optional. I didn't need to apply any hardware because you could just leave it as it was, but I really wanted some gold on there, so I ended up ordering these ones off of Amazon. I'll make sure I link it in the description, but I do want to warn you guys, the nails, I mean, there's tiny nails and then there's these nails. They were so small, so they were really challenging to get in. So I ended up having to apply a little bit of hot glue to the inside of the metal hardware just to keep it in place so it was nice and centered after I measured it, because those nails, it was almost impossible to get in. And this is how it looks now. The next project really taught me a lot about restoring wood furniture, such as this mid-century modern wood bench. I found this old patio bench on the side of the road in Scottsdale, decided to throw it in my car. My husband thought I was absolutely crazy, but I saw a diamond in the rough with this one. And sure enough, I looked it up online. It's from Jocelyn, Maine, and it's over $500 originally. So after I clean it off, the first step in restoring furniture, especially something like this, is going to be to use an electric sander. If you don't have an electric sander and you're using a smaller piece of furniture, I would say that's probably okay. But for something like this, with all the spindles, all the twists, the turns, you need something that's heavy duty, because my arms were ready to fall off even with an electric sander. So definitely I did go in with a handheld sander just for some of the trickier parts, but for the most part, that electric sander saved the day. Now that we're all sanded down, it looks pretty good. I got most of the primer and the paint off. There's still a couple parts that I was not able to, but I do have some stain and some brown paint to kind of help disguise some of the parts I was not able to sand down completely. As you can see on the back here, there's just still some of that primer that I just could not sand off. So I have a little trick that I'm gonna show you guys a little bit later in the video, but right now I have to tighten the screws, add some wood filler to those cracks just to kind of make it one solid piece. And now I'm just taking this washcloth, just kind of wiping everything down, so then that way it's a clean slate before I go into the staining and painting part. I'm using this wood stain by Varathane. It is in a special walnut, which is my favorite stain to use on wood products. Now I'm just kind of dabbing the old washcloth in the stain and then applying it evenly to the wood. I would say that stain is a lot more forgiving than paint, and it's a lot quicker. So if you're in a rush for time versus painting something, I would say staining it might even be better. So after I had stained it and I got the desired effect, I stained it 4 times. There were still a couple like little spots that I had to go in with some brown spray paint. I'll link the one that I used here. You can get it off of Amazon, just to kind of give it a more complete, I didn't want it to be too perfect, but I wanted it to be more complete looking, and I think I got that effect with that brown spray paint. And I mean, obviously it's not perfect like if I would have bought it straight from Jocelyn, Maine, but it's still pretty darn good. And I'm super proud of myself for doing this, because I have 0 woodworking skills. One project that you guys always seem to ask about is this faux snakeskin lumbar pillow I have on my guest bed. So I'm going to use this fabric to make the pillow. These scissors are great because they have I guess serrated edge, which helps from the fabric fraying. I think I got these off Amazon. They're very inexpensive and they do make all the difference. Some people get really specific in terms of measurements and maybe using chalk to line where you want to cut, but I just kind of use fabric on top of fabric to gauge how much space I'm going to need. And then it's as easy as running it through the sewing machine and just kind of feeding it through for both sides and then hand stitching the other side. If you don't have a sewing machine, that's no big deal. You can use fabric adhesive if you have that, even hot glue. I've done that. You can even hand stitch. That takes a lot more time, but you can do that. Just because you don't have a sewing machine does not mean you cannot make this DIY. And then I just put the insert in the pillow before I did that hand stitch at the end, and it is done. I absolutely love how this pillow came out. I think it totally brings out the brown of the branches that we made for the headboard, also fitting in with that vibe. I'm very into how something fits in with a room, and I feel like this snake skin really is fitting for this room. I wanted to share with you guys is this wooden round I picked up from the Thrift for only $2.99. I really liked this specific wooden round because it was really unfinished and natural looking, which is perfect for the DIY that I had in mind. It was almost 11 inches across and about 2 inches, just under 2 inches deep, which because it was so deep, I thought would make the perfect thing for some bookends. The first thing I needed to do was decide what pieces I wanted to use from this wooden round, because it wasn't symmetrical all the way through, so I wanted to pick the two best, most symmetrical pieces to make it look like one half moon. I've been on a McGee & Co. kick recently, and she had these wheel cog bookends that inspired this DIY. And because I had already measured it, I knew what the halfway point was going to be, as well as how deep in I needed to go from the top. Just to kind of give you a breakdown of the setup right here, I'm using a circular saw, and the circular saw is butted up right against my straight edge to make sure that I'm following my line exactly straight. And those clamps are there to keep everything in place to make sure that I have a perfect 90-degree angle every single time. And now that we've sectioned off our top piece, it's just time now to measure again one more time just to make sure they're nice and symmetrical, and find the halfway point between the ends to get our two bookends. And again, I'm just using that speed square with a pencil, drawing a line right down the middle, and that line is what I'm going to use to guide the circular saw. And now I'm just following that line that I just made and making sure that they're super straight, using my straight edge to help guide my circular saw. As I mentioned earlier, what I really liked about this wooden round was how natural looking it was. So you can obviously, if you find one like this and you want to stain it, feel free, but I really liked how natural it looked. And this is how our bookends turned out. This is even better than a thrift flip because I actually got this table for free. So what I'm doing, first thing, this little table has seen much better days, but I had big plans for this table. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm taking some 100 grit sandpaper and just making everything really nice and smooth, because we are actually going to be covering this table with some grass cloth contact paper. And obviously, because this table was a little bit wonky, it's seen much better days, I needed to bust out my electric sander just to get off those rough spots to make it nice and smooth. And now I'm just taking an old damp rag to take off some of that dust so the contact paper applies really, really evenly and smoothly. I wanted to show you guys this because I thought, oh, these rings will look so cool if I just like paint them gold. They look like they were meant to be gold. And then when I did it, I was like, oh no, this is not it at all. So I wanted to show you, like, when you're doing a DIY project, like, you go through so much trial and error to get the look that you want, but especially with paint, like, don't be scared to try something, because I ended up changing it back to black and no harm was done. And now that we've put this table through the beating of a lifetime with paint and sand, it is time for our contact paper. And as I mentioned earlier, I found this grass cloth contact paper on Amazon for a really affordable price. I think it was under $8, and you get a decent amount for what I was going to be needing. It was more than enough. The first step when you use contact paper is you want to measure and use that grid that they give you on the back of the paper as a guideline. Also, another tip I've learned along the way is you want to work from one end and then down diagonally. So if you're working from the left, go diagonal down to the right, and make sure you're placing an emphasis on the corners to make sure that you're not going to create a lot of air bubbles along the way. And use force when you're pushing down this specific contact paper, because it wasn't the stickiest, which is good and bad. It's bad because you have to keep pressing down, but it's good because if you make a mistake, you can go over it and over it and over it. And obviously you probably won't find this exact same table, but I hope you guys can use this as a guideline. If you do find a table that you like, or a dresser, or whatever it is, that you can apply some of these concepts to that table that you would be working on. If you're doing the top of a surface, I like to, again, use that grid on the back, make a nice clean cut, as clean as it can be. And before you start really working on the corners, you want to get the flattest possible stick on the top, because that's what you're really going to be seeing every single day. And that's why the sanding was so important in the beginning of this DIY. So again, you're going to start on the left and you're going to work your way down diagonally all the way down to the very bottom right corner. And that way you get a nice clean surface, as clean as it can be. Another helpful tip is, after you've gotten the top piece exactly as you want it, just flip whatever you're working on upside down so you can now see where's going to be the places that you actually need to cut to give a nice fold over so it looks really clean and seamless. Basically, what I do when I do a squared surface like this one or a rectangular surface is you just want to cut a 90-degree angle and then fold that over. You want to press along the sides first and then press along what you've just folded over, placing an emphasis on every corner there is. And you want to just keep maneuvering the table, flipping it every single which way to make sure you're nicely covered. There's no air bubbles. If you do have an air bubble, I've mentioned this before, you can always take a needle and just puncture that bubble that was created and smooth it over, and it'll get rid of that bubble in an instant. So as I mentioned earlier, I did end up using a blow dryer. That's like the best trick in the book if you have contact paper that's not super sticky or keeps kind of popping off, because it really helps heat the adhesive to make it stick to whatever surface you're trying to stick it onto. But you guys, I couldn't get that gold out of my mind. Like, I needed there to be gold. So I ended up buying these little corner pieces off Amazon, and I applied them to every single corner just with a little screwdriver. And I think it just made it feel more complete. And this is how our side of the road side table turned out. I found this wooden bowl for only $2.99 at the Goodwill. If you've been following me for a little bit now, you know that I have a slight obsession with wooden bowls, and I thought this would be the perfect thing because everything I've been seeing on Pinterest is this really beautiful, unfinished look, and they put artichokes or they put lemons, and I think it just looks so chic. So, because I didn't like the bowl as it was, I was very comfortable with sanding it down. So a couple things when you're sanding, especially sanding something as excessive as this, is you definitely want to use an electric sander, definitely worth the investment, and always wear gloves and goggles. Now, also some of the bowls that I saw people do on Pinterest, they were using like a whitewash or they were staining it after, and I knew that I didn't really want to do that because I wanted to actually be able to use that bowl. And when you use whitewash and when you use stain, that no longer allows for the bowl to function for food and things like that. So what I ended up doing was actually picking up some oil off of Amazon. It's like FDA approved, it's food safe. So that is what I ended up applying to this bowl instead. Now, of course, if you're just using this for decor, stain away. But for me, I really wanted to be able to actually use this bowl and put food in here. So that's why I did what I did. We are going to be taking this basket that I found at the Goodwill for $4.99 and making it into a beautiful beaded pendant light. Some of the other materials that I used for this project were wooden beads that I purchased off Amazon, as well as my hot glue gun and some needle and thread, and I got the light fixture part from IKEA. Now, these pendant lights are super trendy right now. I can see if I can link some pictures here to show you, but they're also really expensive. So I'm going to show you guys a very affordable way to make this project on your own. So before I did any of like the crazy beading or anything like that, I needed to make sure that this DIY was actually tangible and something I'd be able to actually do. So I wanted to make sure that the light fixture part was going to work before I did anything else. And I just did so by tracing the top of the light fixture to the bottom of the basket. And after I traced that circle, I just cut around to make sure that it was gonna fit, and I got rid of all of those little loose parts of the basket. And I just popped the light fixture in, making sure that it fit nice and snug. What I like about the IKEA light fixture here is that it has another part that attaches to it from the inner side. So I feel like that's what adds to the kind of structure of this pendant light. And now that that part is all secure, it's just time to start on the bead work. I'm gonna give you guys a forewarning. This part does take quite a bit of time, but the end result was so beautiful. I think it's totally worth it.
I bought this large pack of beads on Amazon for $16, and I'm only going to be using 3 of the sizes. So I ended up using the 20 millimeter, the 16 millimeter, and the 14 millimeter. So how I decided to string the beads along was just good old needle and thread, because I needed something that was going to be able to be sewn into the basket. And you'll see what I mean a little bit later on, but pretty much the pattern that I landed on was I did 6 14 millimeters, then 6 16 millimeters, and then 4 20 millimeters. And then I went back to 16 and then 14. So it kind of made a loop around. And you can see I have my trusty bowl here just to make sure all the beads don't slide out the other end. And to secure the beads on either side of the thread, I actually just put a little dab of hot glue so they stayed put exactly where I wanted them to stay. Obviously, you'll want to leave excess on either side of your thread, because that is how you're going to actually attach that individual string of beads to your basket. So you're going to want to leave enough that you can thread it around a couple times into your basket. But I did want to mention, this is just the pattern that I chose because this was what worked for my basket. So when you go to your thrift store, the odds of you finding this exact same basket is probably very slim to none. So you'll have to see what you find and what's going to look right. So I just did 1 string of beads at a time, so then that way I could kind of see how everything was gonna lay and everything was like approximated well. And to stick the needle in, I just picked the part where it kind of divots in so it would be easy to feed through. And I was able to sew around each side about 3 times, so I felt like it had a pretty secure hold, but obviously if you feel like you need more support, you can always add hot glue to the inside of the basket. And I just continued on that way. The rest of the process is very repetitive, and like I said, would have to be very customizable based on whatever basket you landed on. And as you're working on it, if you're trying to gauge how much you should let the beads hang, just kind of like lift the lampshade up so you can kind of see exactly where it's gonna fall to make sure everything is gonna be nice and symmetrical. And after I sewed the first string of beads on, after I did my second string of beads, I tied it directly adjacent to the first string. And I just repeated that process until the whole bottom layer of our pendant light was completely filled. After that first row was all done, I decided to go in between each of those like petals, we'll call them, and I decided to do another one that was laying over top of it. So it kind of had like a layered beading effect. The pattern that I followed for those was I started with 4 14 millimeter, 4 16 millimeter, and then 10 20 millimeter, and then back to 14 and 16. So it stays nice and symmetrical, and then that way you have something that looks really nice and put together. But I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this DIY does take quite a bit of time. It took me about 2 hours to do all of the beadwork and sew it in and everything. But honestly, for $25, it is a steal in comparison to things that you will see at some of the high-end stores. And this is how our beaded basket pendant light chandelier turned out.
Next up is definitely one of the easiest projects of the bunch, and is the faux leather wrapped vase. If you watched my thrift with me, you'll know that I found this vinyl bag that I'm going to show you how we are going to make 2 different DIYs using this material. So the first thing we need to do is obviously remove the zipper, because we're just taking it for its contents. We are only using the materials. And obviously these DIYs are going to be such small little changes you can make to already decent thrifted items, but they make a major impact in the end. So the first thing, if you want to do a leather or a vinyl wrapped vase, is you just want to cut it down to the size of whatever it is you're wrapping. I'm using a Dollar Tree vase, but if you don't have that, if you could use an old jar, a can, whatever you have on hand, I'm sure is fine. And maybe you already have a little vinyl bag that's just sitting collecting dust in a closet. This is the perfect opportunity to take it out of the closet and do something with it. So you're just going to apply some hot glue to one side as straight as it can possibly be, but obviously you're gonna kind of have a bad side, so we just turn that towards the back, right? And then we're just going to wrap it around very straight and then make another cut to connect the 2 pieces together. and this project literally only takes about 5 minutes to complete, and it looks so high-end and very expensive. Next up was the sponge canvas art that was so easy to create. We are going to be taking this large canvas art that I found at the thrift store and making it a little bit more my aesthetic. There's nothing wrong with this print. It is a print. I'm not damaging anything super valuable or anything like that, but it's just, you know, I don't really have a lot of blue in my house, nor do I want to. I found this print for $19.99, but it was Blue Day, so I got it for 25% off, which makes it about 15 bucks, which for a 30 by 40 canvas print is actually a very affordable price. Like if this fit in your house already, you lucky duck, because honestly, that's such a good deal. But for me, again, I like more neutrals, so I decided to paint it. Now, I'm no Picasso, and this isn't gonna be an original Phoebe buffet, but I am going to show you what I did to make this really aesthetic and neutral. So the very obvious first step whenever you want to remake a print that you found at your thrift store is to just paint it whatever base color you like. I chose to use that same cream acrylic paint that I used in the first DIY just to give it a nice base. I didn't want it to be like stark white, but I did want it to be cream colored. And just to give you guys an idea, here is kind of the look I was going after. I wanted it to be very like neutral and monochromatic, but still have a lot of texture. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm taking a slightly lighter acrylic paint shade in more of a white versus a cream. And to apply this white paint, I'm actually going to be using this sponge I found at the Dollar Tree. You can find it in like the bath section. And I'm just putting it directly in the white paint, but getting some of that excess off. And then now I'm gonna apply it directly to the canvas. So I'm just dabbing that around in random places with no rhyme or reason until I feel like it looks good. I do have a spray bottle here just in case I put too much on. I can kind of like spray it and then take some of the excess off with that spray bottle. And I did that over the entire canvas, and I just wanted to now give it some dimension. So I'm actually going to be doing the exact same thing, but instead of doing white, I'm gonna be doing a slightly darker color. So I used this like mocha acrylic paint, but I mixed it with a lighter color, and I still wasn't happy with that, so I added a little bit of gray to it as well. So after I got the color that I wanted, I'm taking again a damp brush, and I'm just kind of splotching it all over the canvas. Again, if I use too much, I use my spray bottle just to kind of take off some of that excess. And this is why I love abstract art, for people like me who aren't artists, but who just have a specific color that they want in mind to be portrayed in their house. You can totally do this DIY, and it's so simple, and anybody can do this. For our fourth quick thrift flip I wanted to share with you guys is my favorite new little hack, and it is to take a skirt and transform it into a throw pillow. And after washing it, you just want to flip it inside out, and you can totally use needle and thread, or you can use your sewing machine if you have one. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to use hot glue. I do want to mention one thing. The size of the skirt does matter. I wanted to make a lumbar pillow, so you want to look up custom dimensions if you're making a custom pillow, but I needed it to be 20 inches long. So that is why I went with a size 13, 14 women's skirt, and then the rest is really super easy. You just fold it to the size that you need and then connect it again with hot glue, leaving a little space open so you can add your fill. Now, I personally just decided to take fill from an old pillow that was just collecting dust in my closet and no one was using it, but you can totally place a little order on Amazon and get your pillow already done for you, which would save you even more time. But it is actually incredible that you're able to make a pillow in less than 10 minutes for less than $10 that looks like this one. I'm going to start off by making a face silhouette planter. I saw this idea on Pinterest, so I'll make sure I link their blog post in the description below. And very minimal supplies are needed. You essentially just need a planter and some clay. So the first thing I needed to do for my specific pot was I wanted it to be like a matte black. So I'm using this one by Rust-Oleum in Farmhouse Black. And then I just had to prep my clay, so I'm just cutting off a little section and rolling it out so I get a pretty flat surface. And then I'm just taking a box cutter. If you have an X-Acto knife, use that. And then I'm just kind of constructing the shape of a face, like a jawline, an eyebrow, a nose, just little things that'll make it look like a face when I attach it to my pot. Once I got the face shape that I really liked, I just needed to put it on some aluminum foil and bake it. I just followed the baking instructions on the clay. I think it was bake at 245 for 15 minutes. I'll make sure I link the clay that I used in the description below as well. And after the clay kind of hardened, it was time for me to hot glue my face shape on the planter. Some of you guys might remember back in, I think, January, when I made these bookends from this wooden round that I thrifted for only $2.99, and I love that DIY. And some of you guys in the comments were actually asking what I did with the other half, and that is what I'm going to share with you guys. So the other half of the wooden round, all I did was I attached a bracket to the side, and it's going to have a lip on it, and it's going to sit on the bracket that we're going to screw into the wall, and it's going to be like a little mini wooden shelf. I can't take credit for this one. My husband totally thought it up, and I think it looks awesome. For the first DIY project, we are going to be making a placemat display box. So if you watched my thrift with me, you'll know that I picked up this box for only $3.99 at the Goodwill. And then I also found these really beautiful placemats. So 2 pieces that look similar to this is all you really need for a project like this, which is really nice because the supplies are very minimal. I was really happy with this box because it is the perfect starting point for any DIY project. You're not having to undo what someone else already did, which is a lot of times the case. So it made it really easy to kind of just get in there and start working on the project. So before I actually lay the placemat down, I really wanted to stain this box just to make it a little bit more interesting, and you guys will be so proud of me. I finally switched it up and did a different stain, and just to protect the glass, because obviously you could wipe the stain off if it got on there, but just to protect it, I decided to use some blue painter's tape and just cutting around to make sure I got in every little crevice. And I just gave it one even coat all throughout the entire surface of the exterior of the box. I ended up leaving the inside untouched because I thought that that looked better with the placemat. For the placemat, I ended up having to cut off just a little bit, I would say like a ½ inch from the top of the placemat so it could actually fit inside the box and I could see where it would lay. The reason I left this excess here for the time being until everything was really well glued down was because, so this is a woven placemat. So basically what that means is as soon as I start cutting the other way, all of those little reeds or whatever you want to call them, spindles, are going to start coming off of the thread. So I wanted to make sure everything was secured down first before I started trimming off the rest of it. And I'm just marking about where I'm going to need to cut eventually, but for the meantime, I'm just going to lay down some wood glue. You could use hot glue, you could use E6000, but both of these pieces are wood, so wood glue is perfect for this project. And I gave a very generous coating to the bottom of this tray of the wood glue, and then I left about a 1/2 inch around the perimeter, and you'll see why I did that in the end. And once the wood glue was all kind of spread around, it's just time to stick our placemat in there. And in order to keep it really secure and not move about, I decided to add a 20-pound weight on top of a book on top of the placemat. So that way it really had time and force to kind of grip together. And now with everything all dry, it's just time now to go in and cut off that excess like I mentioned earlier. So I'm just doing so using scissors, and I'm cutting at the marks where the thread is attaching all of these pieces together. And as I suspected, as soon as I started cutting, they just started to pop right off. So I did end up having to just attach 2 of the spindles back onto the bottom of the box, which is why I didn't glue the whole thing down, just because I didn't want it to get super messy. And just to follow the continuing pattern, I just placed both of those reeds using a little bit of hot glue. And it's not the perfect solution, but when the box is covered, you can't even tell. And I was thinking, oh, it would be so cool if these were all white. And then I did a scrap piece, which I always want to tell you guys, do it off to the side first, or do it on a scrap piece of whatever you're working on to see if you like it before you apply it to your project, because it honestly looks so much better this way. And lastly, if you're here for DIY 21, was the branch frame headboard. The only thing that I have lying around the house that's even remotely similar to the shape of a headboard is these vertical mirrors. I swear, I think every person in America has this mirror. And the game plan for this is going to be to remove the backing, which is just like paper cardboard, and see if we can detach the adhesive from the back. But man, these babies were glued down. These mirrors are pretty inexpensive just normally, but I ended up getting mine from the thrift store for $5.99, so that was a steal. And this kind of gives me the peace of mind that if it doesn't go exactly as planned, it's no big deal. To remove this adhesive, I ended up just applying some Goo Gone along all the edges and then giving it a little bit of time. Now that the frames are hollowed out, it's time for me to find some really cool branches. I have some trees in my backyard, but definitely not enough, and they're not nearly as cool than if I was gonna go like out into like a forest. I went to this forest nearby my house where they have such tall, beautiful trees. There's branches galore. I'm sure it probably just depends where you live, but we live in DC, so there's lots and lots and lots of trees. Before I start working with the branches that I just picked out, I really wanted to give this frame a black matte effect, because right now it's kind of shiny, kind of cheapy looking, and I wanted it to feel a little bit more expensive, and matte black is just so trendy right now, so I just gave this a once over with a can of black spray paint, and while that's drying, it's time to go work on those branches. The frame looks so stinking good painted in this matte black. This is exactly what I had in mind. It's so much more expensive looking, not so cheapy, plasticky. That's not the vibe I'm going for. So this is exactly what I had in mind, and just an example of a small change you can make to make your house look more expensive. While that spray paint is drying, I just have all of the branches that I collected kind of broken in half, at least longer than the frame of the mirror, but smaller, so I'm working with a little bit more of a realistic situation. And the first thing I need to do with these is to treat them and to try to remove as much bark as I can using a sander. Obviously, using a handheld electric sander would be a lot faster, but it wouldn't really be ideal, and I couldn't seem to get the coordination down. So I just had this little block handheld sander, and honestly, the best way to do this was just to kind of peel the bark off, which was way easier than I thought it was going to be. Now I have pretty much all the bark removed. I didn't do the ends real well because I knew I was gonna have to chop some of these off still. So the bark is for the most part removed in the center, so I can measure out now what's gonna look good. This got kind of tricky because I didn't want it to look like, like a jail cell. Like I wanted them to have some characters, some twists, some turns, some vines, some personality. So I kind of had to play with the branches to get the effect that I wanted.
After I had gotten a pretty good idea of what was gonna show in the frame is exactly what was in my mind, I just marked with a purple marker down where the frame lied, so I knew I had to cut an inch in from that so I'd be able to glue everything down. So I just used this saw. I have no woodworking skills, so if I can do this, anybody can do this. This part was definitely the most time consuming because I had 20 sticks to get through, number one, and number two, I wasn't just chopping off one end of the branch because I had to do both ends because there was different aspects of each branch that I wanted to show through the frame. Now with a little bit of time and a little bit of sweat, I have all of my branches laid out. We're ready to go. I decided to number the top of each branch so I knew A, what was the top, and B, what was the order or the sequence of what I wanted to show through the frame. I actually hot glued everything inside, so I just gathered up my branches and I laid them off to the side and used a hot glue gun and glued the sticks to the back of the frame in the sequence that I had planned outside. And this is how the headboard came out. It is so beautiful, so woodsy, giving me those really cabin vibes. And it was so nice to hang because it was originally a mirror, it already had those little clasps on either side to also be hung horizontally. So very easy DIY, a little bit time consuming, but still so beautiful. And think about how much headboards normally cost, hundreds of dollars, and this was literally free.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked today's video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and hit the subscribe button because like I said, I post home decor DIY content every Sunday, and I hope I see you guys next Sunday. I think next Sunday what we're gonna do is just the typical 3 or 4 DIYs. I hope I see you guys next Sunday, and with that being said, have a great week ahead and I'll see you then. Bye.